Welcome to SHOWstudio. It's our second panel of New York Fashion Week. It's a very exciting one also because we're going to be talking about the Thom Browne show, and we haven't really had that much discussion about Thom Browne on SHOWstudio before, so I'm intrigued to hear what everyone's going to say. But before we start dissecting his aesthetic and what he's done for this season, I'll let my wonderful set of panellists introduce themselves. We've got a surprise guest on the end who I'm very excited about. But if you can start, Harriet, with introducing yourself.
I'm Harriet Verney and I'm a writer.
I'm Tom Hingston, I'm an art director and designer.
And I'm Nick Knight, I'm the director of SHOWstudio.
I want to start by talking a little bit about American aesthetics, which is something that I'm quite interested in with Thom Browne, because he's talked a little bit before about that being something that's interesting to him and that infuses his design. And I think perhaps less and less we have this sense of, we often talk about the vibe in certain fashion cities, but we perhaps wouldn't talk about an American style of dressing. Do you guys see that in his work? Do you think that that's something that has this, the history of American sportswear is really quite amazing? Do you think that he's an American designer?
There's a big kind of vintage influence in a lot of his work.
Yeah.
Even the kind of trouser length and there's a certain aesthetic, isn't there, that Thom Browne's always had on the more sort of tailored conservative pieces.
Would you guys wear those skinny cropped?
It's a strange look. It's a slightly sort of schoolboy look.
Yeah, it's quite fetishy, but a lot of his work's quite like that.
I'm not sure I want to dress like a schoolboy.
Fair enough.
I mean, it's just a slightly strange sort of embracing of a particular time.
Yeah.
It just feels odd for a man to be doing it. I don't mean wrong, it's odd, and you asked me if I would Thom Browne wear it, but
it's interesting, isn't it, because that skinny, even though that kind of cartoonish, very shrunken suit, I think people see as quite almost a bit of a gimmick. That real kind of slim-fitting silhouette crop to jacket, that really has taken off in tailoring, and I think it's something that's really, really accepted now. And I think that's interesting. He has had a huge influence as a designer.
Yeah, I think he has. I think the way that he presents his collections, I'm not sure you would wear the clothes like that. But for instance, I wear a lot of Thom Browne. I'll wear a shirt or a jacket from him, but I wouldn't wear that whole look.
Kind of,
yeah. Because as you say, it is very boyish, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I wear a short trouser.
Yeah, you do.
But that's back from skinhead days.
Tell me about that.
Well, a lot of my style, my personal style, is based on my teenage years. I did wonder whether that's something that we all have. That there's a certain moment when you're growing up, when you first start to reach out and grope your own personal identity, that actually that's the thing that sticks with you all the way through your life and you keep coming back to it. Well, that's just me. But so I do wear quite a short trouser, and I notice all my suits are cut short and my jeans are cut short. So I don't mind that. It's just, I think it's the tightness and the shortness and the sort of slight schoolboyness I find a little, I'm not sure I want to look like that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting the way he spoke about it. I'm interested to get sort of all your thoughts on this, because he's talked about this, like the ubiquity of casual dressing and how he felt like that made a space for him to do something that was, he said it almost became anti-establishment actually to wear a jacket. You know, such was the kind of proliferation of just wearing like t-shirts and jeans. And like we've spoken about this before on panels, that you love this notion of kind of dressing up and you like things that are fitted and have a waist for women's. And it seemed just purely based on, I know what you wear most days, but from you guys are wearing today, you like a jacket, you like a suit. Do we think that time is ripe for kind of smart clothes? No one does.
I think some men really suit it and some men really shouldn't wear suits.
Yeah.
I really believe that.
That's actually very true.
It is true.
Yeah.
And I quite like the schoolboy look, but I like the hats and all the little accessories and high neat socks.
So you think you have to commit to doing this?
I quite like it. And that is a weird fetish thing.
Yeah. Why do you like it though?
I don't know. I like people with prosthetic limbs as well. Like, I just don't know. I think it looks quite nice. I like tiny little shorts. And I like that grey colour that you used to wear at school, and the little ties. Do you remember when they came back into fashion a bit?
Yeah.
But there is a thing for uniform. I think people. That's a real.
All the old blazers with like that red piping down it and stuff like that. I love.
Yeah.
It's that British school uniform thing, which when I was a school child, is that the right word?
School child.
When I was at school, I hated it. I really hated it.
Yeah.
I came back to England in 1970 from living in Belgium and in Paris and France, where you had no school uniform at all. And suddenly we put into this awful school uniform. My jacket was a sort of green colour, of which there is no equivalent in nature. It's a sort of astroturf, green screen, green jacket.
Oh,
and the sort of, it was really sort of an affront to my own personal expression. So I've always hated school uniform, but I've grown up and now I do wear quite a strict uniform.
Yeah.
So but I tend to think that's because I've what I do. So I have to wear certain clothes because if I'm in the studio, you know, I'm going to ruin whatever trousers I'm in. So
yeah.
But also that's out of choice that you wear that. Whereas school uniform is imposed upon you, isn't it?
Yeah.
To an extent.
I think you make your own uniform, don't you? We were just talking about this. Like you said, you're just wearing sacks and boots.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm just wearing dresses and Vans at the moment.
You do. It's
a uniform, so I
quite
know it works.
fashionable, that notion of a uniform. You know, I think it's all tied into normcore a little bit, but this idea of kind of that you have, it's very fashionable to have a style
and a formula that works for you. Yeah,
it's interesting with that. But it's interesting also. I want to go back to this idea of uniform because I think it's something that people often talk about with British designers. That part of the reason they do really creative stuff is because they grow up having to kind of wear these uniforms, then they finally get the chance to express them. It's quite different with a designer like Thom Browne because kind of removed from that notion of
I think American's quite different. I remember when I first wrote for an American magazine, and Plum Sykes said to me, just remember all American girls want to look like their mothers. They're not like British girls.
Yeah.
They don't want to like be individual and look individual. They want the same Ralph Lauren bag their mum got 20 years ago. That's what's cool. But I don't know if that's just generalising, but she said just remember that when you're writing about whatever I was writing
Is Thom Browne American?
Yeah.
Yes, he is. And he seems to be quite fascinated with a certain period
Yeah.
in American history, right?
Exactly.
Which is kind of 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting. That's a kind of reoccurring thing in pretty much every collection, I think.
Which is interesting because it's like nostalgia of glory days. So
Yeah.
As I say, American style dressing is very different to European.
Yeah.
If you're in an American city, I mean, everybody's dressed, you know, down. It's sort of trainers and jeans and t-shirts.
Yeah.
And you feel very out of place if you dress differently from that.
Yeah.
You either fit into kind of, you know, financial Wall Street side of it, or you. There doesn't seem to be that sort of.
It's very clean cut, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's also very. Nearly everybody's wearing the same thing.
Yeah.
There's less of the sort of individuality you see in London.
Yeah.
Sort of, but I guess London's a particular place as well because you have all the different cultures mixing together in London, so you get a lot of different differences in one place.
Yeah.
Whereas in New York, you should get that. There seems to be a sort of slightly kind of
I do wonder
an ease, a sort of the sort of gap sort of mentality, and the sort of idea that actually it's all doesn't. I don't know.
Maybe it's because they didn't have a uniform, so now they have a uniform after they leave school.
Yeah, no, that's probably true. They kind of probably wanted to fit in, whereas we all wanted to be different.
Huge generalisations. What Americans do, what Americans don't.
Yeah, it's a bit. But it's interesting to go back to that notion where he said, there's a real gap in the market for doing kind of something that's smart and talking about that anti-establishment thing to be to wear a jacket. Because I think you're right. If you read that in Europe, I think that feels quite weird. You think loads of people wear tailoring or they'll mix tailoring with something really casual. But I guess in America, you're right, there is this real kind of proliferation of things like everyone wearing Gap and sweatpants, and there's this real notion of kind of downtown casual dressing. Because what he does seem like a real anomaly on the New York schedule, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, that definitely does. And there's also a really strong sense of kind of craftsmanship to his clothes as well, which comes out. That a lot of the stuff that he's done where he's been exposing actually how the jackets are made, the seams and the collars and the lapels. All of that stuff's really interesting.
Which is really interesting with his background because he studied business and he wanted to be an actor. He's not someone who kind of like spent their youth marvelling at the construction of clothes. That's kind of a passion that came along later, which I think is quite interesting.
He worked for Ralph Lauren, didn't he, for a while? Yeah. And
he was like a Giorgio Armani salesman and stuff, so he's got this interesting history, yeah.
So when did you start designing?
He started designing, he wanted to be an actor and he started just adjusting suits, and that's kind of his journey into... And then he couldn't really afford to do a collection, so he just kind of wore them around himself and kind of a bit of guerrilla marketing, which is quite interesting.
So we talked quite a lot about his menswear, but we haven't touched on his women's
No,
wear.
he started womenswear in, I think it was 2011,
right.
But really sort of cut his teeth as a menswear designer, which is another question I wanted to ask you guys, because I'm really interested. I feel like a lot of the womenswear designers on the womenswear schedule that we are very excited about at the moment, people like Raf Simons or Eddie Simone, they come from a menswear background. I was wondering why we think there's been that. Is it literally just kind of pure chance? What is it that's making menswear designers do so well on a womenswear schedule? What do you think, Harriet? You're just so fascinated by the phone.
I don't know. Women wanting to dress more like men, I don't know. Maybe it's a feminist thing, which I don't even want to touch on because we did that last time. But I don't know. I think women love men's tailoring.
Yeah.
I've always envied anyone that can go to Savile Row and half. I've been to like 2 people and they said, no, we don't really do women's here.
Yeah.
And I've always got really pissed. I don't know why they do it.
That is interesting because, this kind of boyishness of female dressers become huge,
but I don't think people like Raf Simons really do that, but...
No, that's interesting.
I don't know if it's a trend so much as just as a couple of good individuals
who
are good designers and therefore have a good vision. I mean, we're talking about Eddie Slimane and Raf Simons,
Yeah.
I mean, Raf had such a strong vision. I think it was natural that strength of vision then could be rolled out into women's wear.
But I wonder if something from that comes from training to be a men's designer rather than training to be a women's designer, because people often say this, and I also think this is a massive generalisation, but when you're working as a men's designer, you are working within stricter codes and rules and regulations than you are if you're trained to be a women's wear designer, purely because men's wardrobe is slightly more limited than women's.
Yeah.
And I wonder if part of that strength of vision, and I know it's just like me musing when it comes from having to work within these regulations,
like details,
and be even more
women's tailoring, like where a button
Exactly.
goes, that can change a whole suit.
Exactly.
Maybe it's that attention to detail that makes it amazing for a woman to wear.
Yeah, because sometimes there's almost
clothes.
like too much choice if you're a women's wear designer.
Yeah,
You can kind of
there's
do
too much
anything.
going on, but I think
And do
Raf's
we-
quite simple in his designs.
Yeah,
Do we
yeah.
see it the other way around? Do we see a kind of women's wear designer then starting a men's range?
You do, yeah, you do
Did
see
Jill
that.
Sanders do
Often
that?
I think it's a bit more.
She did.
Yeah. I think that's
Quite
often a
successfully.
commercial. Often you see women's wear designers who then expand into menswear.
Yeah.
But I think what's interesting with someone like Raf or Eddie is the appointment to be like, Raf's now doing couture for Dior, whereas he started as a men's kind of like.
But don't you think it's just about a vision? I mean,
Yeah.
it's just it's a sort of, it's his, as an artist, it's his vision, and you can roll it out. Sounds horrible, but then you could extrapolate it or put it on anything. It's just that's why they end up. Mark Newson's making cars and spaceships and watches, and because it's his vision of things, and that can be put across a lot of different platforms. So if you're a fashion designer, I guess I see your point that if you're making menswear, you're making tailoring and things, then there's a certain amount of craft and skill that has to be learned, because otherwise the suits look awful.
Or
I
even
guess,
like a narrowness, perhaps. That's what I mean. With women, it's
Yeah.
kind of like the world's your oyster. With men's, it's kind of like this is what you can do. And I wonder if sometimes working within constraints produces more creative work. Do you know what I mean?
Well, perhaps giving if you're given the opportunity to do women's like Thom Browne has, then it's a really exciting opportunity to then break some of those codes and actually play a little bit more. And actually, his women's wear is quite playful, isn't it? It's him having fun.
Yeah.
Maybe it makes you more creative because you don't have the constraints of what you had to learn and how it should be done, and then you do it your own way.
How do I want to pick on you here, Tom, just because I know you work with lots of brands and just in your role as an art director, you're working with people and looking at the way they've developed and built their brand. What do you think about the way he has built his brand and the kind of narrative that he's done? What do you find interesting about it?
I think it's really interesting. The last few shows, I was talking to Nick about it before we came on, that there's something much more playful and much more experimental going on, and much more kind of fantastical in terms of the characters that you're seeing on the runway. And I think that's really interesting, because prior to that, the shows have been not conservative, but they have been what is kind of synonymous with Thom Browne, right? And he's starting to really play with the
so
clothes.
His point of difference. Hasn't it,
the people that are wearing them, how they're presented. It's very interesting.
Do you think that's a reaction to the fact that other shows, especially in somewhere like New York, are becoming much more streamlined, much more trade showy?
Much slicker, much more commercial, possibly. Yeah, definitely. Because as a commercial brand, I think he's really successful, isn't he? So there's obviously
Gives him that freedom.
latitude to then go out and be a bit more playful, and a bit more experimental.
Do we like seeing that a designer who, we all know that Thom Browne, he's selling lots of jackets and he's selling lots of shirts and he's not selling what he's putting on the road. Do we like kind of seeing that disconnect? Because that disconnect happens anyway, even if the runway is really, really commercial. There's still a massive commercial collection behind it of sweatshirts and t-shirts. So do we kind of think just go for it, on the runway, do something great?
I think so, and I think also that goes back to what I was saying earlier, that by the time you break those looks down into jackets, into a pair of trousers, into a pair of shorts, actually they are very wearable pieces, I think.
Or they're the beginnings of a wearable idea.
Exactly.
Covered in a crazy embellishment and strip it off.
It's exaggerated. I think it's good. It's keeping the catwalk alive. Like if that goes and it all just becomes like a shop wear, that'd be so dull.
Yeah,
to look at stuff like that.
I think there's probably a realisation that catwalk is the moment where you can really show off.
Yeah.
Where they can really do a spectacle and get across their artistic vision, and we saw what Gareth did with Lexus, and all of those sort of the big shows where it's really kind of like a spectacle, it's entertainment. I mean, I don't know why they don't charge people. I don't know why they don't say, okay, we've got 300 seats for the kind of industry, and here's 1,000 seats for anybody who wants to come and
absolutely,
and probably finance a show. But my feeling is that's where all the energy is going now. Because the advertising campaign, which used to be the sort of the sort of way of expressing, as Tom and I know because we worked on Dior together, used to be the way of expressing the designer's vision afterwards, is now much less relevant. Actually, this moment where everybody sees the clothes for the first time online, and very soon we can't already do it. We can buy them online. So it's sort of, that's the moment where they make their sort of vision to the world apparent.
Yeah, and so if there's themes or ideas behind the collection, this is the place that those can be brought out or emphasised, whereas you can't really do that in campaigns anymore because it's much more sort of commercially driven.
Yeah, I don't think Thom has a campaign, does he? Sort of print campaign for Thom Browne?
No, he doesn't, no.
So this is his moment.
His
platform,
moment. But it's interesting because I was thinking about this with I don't know if you guys have followed this that closely, but the new Burberry adverts that everyone's kind of going crazy about, that My Burberry, where it's all kind of personalised, and it almost feels like what they're doing, and that's just a perfume ad.
Yeah.
And what they're doing is trying to almost make the advertising campaign slightly more like the catwalk, more interactive, something that you can kind of pick bits that you want straight away. And it's interesting to think of the catwalk show as almost an extension of the advertising campaign, something that is interactive, that you can kind of, lots of different brands have done things where you can like the things that you that you
it's like Moschino, you can buy it straight away.
Exactly, customise it, and it's interesting to see that, but it makes me wonder, as Nick says, whether we should acknowledge that the catwalk show, perhaps there are lots of different facets to it now, and I think that's perhaps where some of the confusion is, where people don't know whether to do something that's very trade showy, because there's lots of people saying, catwalk show there for the journalists and the editors, and people trying to reclaim that. Yeah. And then there's other brands going, oh, but no, this is something that loads of people look at, this is a brand thing, and there's this real confusion, I think, about what the catwalk is, and maybe it does need to be.
The commentators on the catwalk tend to be the journalists who are saying, no, keep it private. So they're the people who are commentating on it. There's actually a lot of other people who be really interested to go or to watch it, quite happy for it to be more open and more spectacle and more entertainment. So I don't think the catwalk show will ever disappear. I think it'll become more of an online spectacle. Here we are sitting. Less elitist, and not about elitism at all. About marketing and about communication and about getting your word out to theatre. About theatre. We're sitting here discussing it like as if it was it's a piece of entertainment, and we're going to sit down and look at it like it's a theatre piece. So I think that's where it's going. And the other thing I noticed on the catwalks, talking about catwalks, is how the models have lost their personality.
They're like fembots.
But you even see that in the most theatrical shows. The theatre is never.
That's what I was wondering about what we'd see on here. It's the theatre of the show, but it's not the theatre of the personality of the model.
And the Queen's ones used to be so funny.
That was what was amazing about the Izzy Blow exhibition. That some of that old footage was incredible, wasn't it?
It's like Dan McMillan. I remember he was wearing those. Do you remember those really low cut trousers? And then he put his crotch in Anna Wintour's face. It's like no one would do that nowadays, but I think they should.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the only designers that really do that are people that streetcast, and the only people that really streetcast that I'm aware of so much is Medium Kirchhoff do that. But I think it's because those girls aren't models, so they're naturally able to do it. Whereas I almost think that's stripped out of models. They're taught not to do that.
Yeah, well, because I've been doing a lot of my interviews of models for the show Subjective.
Check it out on SHOWstudio.
Sorry, that sounds like a plug. And hairdressers, makeup artists, and stylists. Just to find out, and there's a lot of feeling that there was a time when the models encouraged to be a personality, and now they're really not. I mean, they're encouraged just to be beautiful in the designer's vision of beauty, but that's it. They don't interact with the audience. They don't do anything other than what they've been told to do, and that's not very much. So all that character's gone.
Then someone like Cara Delevingne's going down with Instagramming it, so I don't know if there's a difference of interaction. It's not with the audience around them; it's with the one online instead.
So is Cara taking a camera down the catwalk?
For Giles, she did, didn't she?
Yeah, she took a selfie while she was on the catwalk.
Yeah, she was videoing it.
But it's interesting, I think, with Cara, because it's like, the new US Vogue cover, it's got Cara and I think Carly, and I can't remember who the other girl on the cover is. And it's like the Instagram generator, they've called them like the Insta models, and they're really making a lot of that kind of, that these models are characters. But then I think they've done things like they've airbrushed all of Cara's tattoos out of the picture and stuff like that. So it's kind of this weird embracing of character, but also not. It's really odd.
What's the circulation of American Vogue? Half of Cara's Instagram circulation, a third, a quarter. The balance of power has changed. We've talked about it a lot in this. But if the models have got 5 million followers on Instagram, and the magazine circulation is 200,000, really the balance of power has changed completely now. So I'm not surprised American Vogue are doing something on Instagram generation. It's about generation. It's about to wipe them out.
It's weird though. I want to get back to this idea of model of characters. I don't want to pick on you too much, Nick, but we've talked about this because obviously make a huge amount of fashion films, and we've talked about how sometimes it's no disrespect to the models, it's just because they're not kind of encouraged to be as it's hard to find girls even that can move on a film. You know, they're very used to being shot in a static way, isn't it? It's quite an interesting idea that girls are just encouraged to be almost like a hanger.
Yeah, but I think there's always been a sort of different sorts of models, and some move a lot more.
Yeah.
So somebody like Lily Donaldson, for instance, or Raquel Zimmerman, you know, they move. So if you're photographing and taking pictures of them, they'll still move all the time. Whereas somebody like Kate or Naomi tends to be, you know, a pose and then another pose and another pose. It's just a different method of modelling. So you have to find the right model for the right thing. I'm not saying Kate and Naomi can't do fashion film, but you do find models that were more adapted to that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Kirsty McMenney, for instance, you know, moves all the time. It's a sort of, you know, ongoing thing. So you do need to find the right girl to make a fashion film.
Do you think it's to do with girls getting younger and younger, the kind of girls that pick for catwalk shows? Because it is interesting, we're going to see it with Thom Browne, like it's such a theatrical show, but the girls aren't in the theatre, they're almost even more anonymous because of it. Do you think it's because they're young? What is it that's making
I thought there's a limit on how young you have to be.
They're meant to be like 16, but 16 is
think
pretty
that
young.
make them more playful?
Yeah. I don't know what it is.
Depends what they've seen before and what their agency are telling them.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's, you know, it's the same way you say American Vogue airbrushed out all the tattoos. It's that removing of anything that might be difficult, might go against the grain, might not do exactly what you expect. You know, so if they don't let the girls have any character or any expression, then they're controlling all that. So it's probably why they just don't want to rock the boat. You never know who's going to walk down, do what. If you allow them to, which of course will make it much more exciting for everybody, but they don't. They're too frightened to let go.
Picking on you again, Tom, do you find that, you know, you work with so many different brands, do you find there is this real nervousness of doing, because I feel like we're in a time where everyone's like, oh, you can do anything, there's so much creative freedom, people are doing really exciting things, but do you find with things like when it comes to campaigns or anything like that, people are very nervous?
I think when it comes to campaigns, people are there's definitely a lot more sort of conservatism, and I think, you know, the removal of tattoos is a really good example of that, or the removal of piercings or jewellery, or, you know, definitely.
Why do you think that is? Do you think that, because if you think all the campaigns that we think about that we love and the iconic kind of covers, like, you know, Terry Jones, the green jelly and stuff like that, it's all things that are totally bizarre and quite haphazard, and often I think could have gone really either way. You know, we either think they're the best cover ever or awful. Do you think people are just much more inclined to want a middle road? I
think so, and I think a lot of people have to report into investors, and you know, there's a kind of committee. Not in all instances, but in a lot of instances where, you know, that their campaign has to be signed off by a number of sort of stakeholders, if you like, and that's how things start to get diluted.
That's interesting, because we see it also with magazine covers, don't you, as well? Whereas if you think about, like, even just in 10 years, magazine covers have become so much more sort of sanitised, and it feels like they're all done on market research now, rather than just, there's none of that, like, oh, this is a great shot, let's put that on the cover. Like, it's very much kind of like,
well, that's something that you've experienced, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny talking about it, because I don't work so much for magazines anymore, I don't come across it so much. But it used to be a real fight all the time, you know, as to why that shot was chosen, why that had to be taken out, why we had to lose the tattoos, why all this. You know, in the end you think, well, it's because it's a business and they're trying to make as much money as possible, and that's it, and that's a defining factor. So it's not about art, it's not about fashion, it's about how to make money through fashion. And anything that they're worried will upset people, make them look more left of field, make them look a little bit more difficult, you know, they take it out, they sanitise it. But that's true of most things that are fuelled on money. It's just about kind of getting the most units sold.
Why has it got so much work? Because if you think, you know, magazines always wanted to sell, but even if you like all my old Vogues that I've got from like the 80s and 90s, you look at the covers and they are like really amazing, and they're really expensive. Even just stuff like...
It's a big question, Lou.
Yeah, sorry, but like, cause my
I mean, I've got lots of big answers for you, but I'm just not sure.
No, I'm interested in everyone, because, you know, like, one of my favourite Vogue covers ever is a totally mad cover. It's Robbie Williams, and he's
and Giselle,
and he's undoing Giselle's bikini.
Giselle,
I love that.
Yeah, and he's like butt naked, and she's wearing a Union Jack bikini, and he's undoing it, and it's like, can you imagine now, like that happening on a
That's a good cover, isn't it?
Such a good cover, and I love it for what it says about that kind of like Britishness and cheekiness, and it's not like the most amazing image, but it's a great cover.
Yeah, it's Mario, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting because you think like that you just can't imagine that now. Imagine like Harry Styles back turned naked undoing Cara's bikini.
No, it was quite fun and quite bright, you know, of its time. Yeah, definitely.
But I wonder what's changed that, because magazines were still trying to sell it. Is it just there's too many voices? I think that's really interesting what you say.
I think they're in crisis. I mean, that's the problem. They're not selling you know, as I've said about, you know, Cara Delevingne's got 4 million, 6 million, whatever it is, followers, and they're selling, you know, 150,000 copies of the magazine. You know, they're not selling, they're not becoming a voice anymore yet, but that's the only place that the advertisers can put their advertising. So the system's still there, so the advertising still pays for the magazine, and that relationship's still there, but the circulation's going down and down and down and down. So they're all desperate. So they're desperate not to lose their advertisers, because their advertisers are all thinking, should we be doing this? Shouldn't we be online? Why are we in the magazines anymore? Why are we entertaining this particular way of showing our product? Because if the magazines aren't selling, the advertisers at some point are going to jump and go to the medium that does, you know, is seen by more people, and therefore they're all terrified of losing the Armani campaign or the Gucci or whatever it is that keeps them afloat. If you start your magazine, you just need one of those guys say, okay, I'll put, you know, Chanel will put the ad in the front door page, and then you've got a magazine. It's sort of, you know, whatever it is, 20,000, 50,000, 100,000 that comes in from the first door page spread of a magazine. You know, that keeps the rest of the magazine afloat. If you're going to lose that, then in that case, you know, your magazine starts to disappear.
Yeah.
So they're not going to rock that boat.
You do think that the smartest ad campaign at the moment would just be to do like an ad on the Instagram of like the top 10 models, wouldn't it? Which people are already doing. That's the weird thing. Sometimes, you know, you see it on people. We keep talking about poor Cara, like she's really getting picked on. But you can see when she's signed as the face of a brand, it must be written into that contract that she has to Instagram the campaign, because she does every time. And I think that, you know, she'd be smart to make that a part of her worth. You know, that she doesn't just do that for free. It's really interesting that kind of.
Well, we often find that the clients will want models who've got higher social profiles.
Yeah,
social
that's
media
what my
profiles.
agency always says. They say the difference between you and another girl is your Instagram followers.
Yeah.
And I laughed a bit, but then I've realised,
So follow Harriet on Instagram.
Yes, please.
Get her another job.
Should we have a look at Thom Browne Spring? We've so much to talk about, but I'm interested to talk about, so that's the last look, to talk about going a little bit back to talking about the theatre of fashion, because this show is really fantastic, just in terms of totally, completely bonkers. It's kind of like a Mad Hatter's Garden tea party. It's also a bit like a tennis match. You can see the way the spectators are all set. It's a bit Wimbledon-y, which is quite funny, because you know, Anna Wintour loves tennis, so maybe that's about that. We have our first model coming and mowing the lawn, and they were
Quite
coming
Westwood
out.
in a weird way, those hats with those suits.
Which I'm so glad you mentioned Westwood, because I feel like she's a real unsung hero of fashion, which sounds ridiculous because she's obviously so incredibly famous and everyone knows her, but I don't think her skill as a designer and her incredible influence.
I think they're amazing.
She's amazing.
Also, they do quite a lot of collections, so it's a bit like, whoa, which one does she have a hand in?
But I think everyone from Ray Car, Keep It to Rest, everyone's been influenced by Vivienne Westwood, but she's, it's interesting. Great hats by Stephen Jones as well.
They're good, aren't they?
Yeah, really, really good.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. It's kind of like an anti-theft device as well, because no one can really get near you.
Yeah. Or hug you, which is quite nice in fashion.
What are they? Little feathers?
Yeah, feathers.
I bet they move amazingly. She looks so proud.
Yeah.
It's interesting all the suits that he's doing, like what we were talking about earlier about him being a menswear designer.
Yeah. But also just going back to that idea of commercial, that the pieces themselves, when you strip them away, they're not mental, and I think that is really true if you look at what he's doing here.
If you break them down,
the silhouette's not really, like those three looks are kind of the same silhouette, isn't it? He's just playing with surface. And
I think people are really into buying, like, you know, different pieces from a suit and putting them together, like the whole everyone wearing crop top with a matching skirt. People like two pieces rather than wearing one simple dress.
And I do think this notion, maybe the thing with tailoring as well, the reason it's so popular is this notion of hard-working clothes, I think, has become a real big thing, especially in women's wear.
Yeah.
I think people often talk about women's wear as being throwaway, and I feel like a lot of designers have really reacted to that, and they really make pieces that...
Like a suit that can last you for 20 years.
Exactly, yeah.
And he often works with quite traditional fabrics, doesn't he? Quite sort of hard-wearing, sort of herringbone tweeds, things like that, and then just plays with those, which is obviously what he's doing here in some of these pieces. Nice.
What's your take on it, Nick?
I just started letting it sort of, you know, absorb it a little bit. I mean, I like it instantly. I like it because it's sort of, you know, a spectacle. It's surreal, odd, difficult, doesn't quite work yet. You know, I like all that.
It's like what you said, once you take it apart off the catwalk, and I'm sure there'll be an amazing skirt.
Yeah, definitely.
It's so exaggerated here.
Those hats are like handbags on their heads. They're the outline of a handbag. We've got some close-ups that we can show. One thing that I found interesting, because the show took place really late last night, kind of late our time. And the reaction from everyone was there on social. People were so excited and they were loving it. They were saying how amazing it was. And I think it's probably, this is such a breath of fresh air compared to what you see in New York, isn't it? But it's sad because it's not even so much just what you see in New York, it's just what you see now, this notion of kind of a designer doing something that's fun and exciting and immersive. And we'll have a look at some of the kind of other shots, but there were models that were kind of lying around the space, and it really was kind of...
It was quite surreal.
Really surreal.
What's look number 20? Do you think that's fair?
I love it. It's amazing, that coat.
It's really nice, isn't it?
I wonder if it is fair.
Very nice.
Yeah, that's quite fabulous.
Just the shape of that coat, I haven't seen that in ages.
Yeah, I really like the kind of...
It's a dress coat, right?
Yeah, frock coat. Yeah. But some of the shapes here are quite interesting. They're really conservative, which goes back to what we were saying before.
They're not cocktail, you know what I mean? They're not boring cocktail dresses like we always talk about this during London Fashion Week. Is there too many cocktail dresses?
Yeah, too many cocktail dresses.
That hat looks like it's made of tin foil.
Their hats are incredible. I also like what he does because I really admire womenswear designers who can do fashion that's quite that is relatively ageless. And I think what's interesting about this is there's lots of different propositions for different, like the cool young girl that loves his tailoring could wear one of the shorter suits that we saw at the beginning, but these are really kind of friendly towards an older shopper, and I think there's always something really smart when a designer can do that and it doesn't look like their business manager has gone, but you have to put in a dress with sleeves.
Yeah.
Because it can feel really formulaic, you know, when you see it, especially in London sometimes, you can see it with designers being told, you know, you have to do something that will sell to this market or that market, so make that a bit longer, and this feels very effortless.
What's that design? Are those pineapples, Lou?
I don't know. I'm obsessed with pineappals. I'm utterly obsessed with pineapples. I don't actually think they are pineapples, I think they're flowers, which has broken my heart. I don't know why I love pineapples so much, I just really love them. That old Chloe collection with all the pineapples is the best thing ever.
Pineapple tops,
pineapple bikini bottoms.
Moving on from pineapples, what brief do you think he gave Stephen Jones, the hat maker?
That's very clowny, isn't it? Like French sort of old circus, that hat, and then they'd wear the striped all-in-ones with big bottoms down there with the frills.
I imagine, something to do with circus. And it's interesting with Stephen though, because when you ask Stephen, lots of designers work with him in a really, really different way, and he'll talk about this a lot more eloquently than I do, but some kind of talk to him about the mood and let him go. Others will kind of sketch stuff, and it really, really varies. You know, sometimes often they'll just give him a couple of words and he'll go up and make the hat. So I wonder what it is like with Tom, whether it's a slightly more back and forth process.
Maybe.
I read in one of the old review of it, apparently Tom had said that he was just so excited to work with Stephen Jones. He wanted it to be all about the hats rather than the clothes.
Right. Yeah, they definitely feel like they're all off to some sort of mad tea party.
Yeah, they do, don't they?
Oh my God, those hats.
The little suit. But that's so, Stephen, because that's so funny because it's completely, you know, Tom's point of difference, that crazy suit. You know, we all started talking about it.
And he made it into a hat.
He's made it into a hat.
But I wonder how much that comes from Tom, how much is I mean, it's very Stephen.
That's very Stephen.
Is that all it looks, Liam?
Yeah, his veils are so beautiful.
Yeah, the veils are really beautiful.
Who did you do that on before, Prada? They just had those veils across their faces.
Yeah, Mozilla. That's beautiful.
And great colours as well.
But I love the sickness of it because it's a little bit kind of prim and twee, which is interesting given all the girly stuff that we've been talking about. And there's this real sense of, I'm interested, lots of designers seem to be exploring kind of properness, you know, like correctness and appropriateness. And I think here it's very, very like that, but it's kind of really warped.
And those short jackets, like the small blazers, like little boy blazers. Yeah.
A lot of his menswear is coming into, isn't it? There's a lot of menswear type styling in here.
Yeah.
Which I think is a lot more than usual. You know, I know he is a tailoring sort of, that's his background, and all of his collections are very tailored, but last season particularly, there was nowhere near the same amount of suiting. You know, there was lots of tailoring back, and that's quite interesting. And I like the childlike kind of fun of it all. It does kind of look like you invited some children backstage before it started and got them to...
Yeah, the eyewear's interesting as well, isn't it?
I like the turbans.
Yeah, the headwear is just amazing in general. Why do you think people responded so well to it? Do you think it's just because it's joyful?
It's quite a breath of fresh air a bit, isn't it, after... What did they have yesterday, DVF?
Yeah, DVF.
Yeah, you can't really get too excited about that. So.
No, very true.
They're good, those hats.
It really, really goes. Yeah. The problem is, you know that they'll be ruined because some awful street style person will wear it and look ridiculous in it. And
I know exactly who you mean.
What's a street style person?
No, I just mean, you know, like you see these great fresh ideas on the runway and it's really fun and really authentic.
And someone will make their own with a coat hanger.
Some idiot will wear it outside a show and be like, and then it just ruins it.
And it'll be blogged.
Yeah, and then it becomes a gimmick. And it removes.
It should be editorial, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, you want, that's the
thing.
Really is you want to see how someone, like some amazing stylist, takes that and works with it. That coat's really, really amazing.
Mm.
I like the warpedness of it. You know, the flowers are all kind of a bit melting. Everything's kind of dripping a bit, and that's a really great contrast, I think, given that he's known for doing this very precise, quite severe cut of suits, and it's almost like he's taken that and he's just made it all look a little bit like it's kind of
abstract.
Yeah, like melting away, almost like you're seeing it on LSD.
Yeah, definitely. And his colour palette has always been shades of grey, hasn't it? Well, I'm talking about for men now. So, you know, going back to what we were talking about earlier, the women's obviously gives him this brilliant opportunity to say, yeah, I am going to use colour. I can step outside or.
Exactly.
It's that sort of really traditional tailoring with that print there, which is what, from a laundry bag? Yeah. That print? So clever.
I love the look before, sorry, can we just go back to the number 22? It was almost just like two looks just shoved together. I love stuff like that.
It's sawn in half.
Yeah, literally just sawn in half. There's something quite wonderful about that.
Hats are amazing.
Yeah, the hats are absolutely
so amazing. Heavy, that hat on 22. God.
So if you were a buyer and you go into the Thom Browne sales room tomorrow, I guess, can you buy the hats?
No, I don't think so.
Really?
I imagine what would be available to you would be most of the silhouettes, but in much more conservative finishes. And I'm sure you'd probably buy a few of the showpieces to put in the put around.
So what happens to how many looks have we got? 34?
31, I think.
So does Stephen archive 31 hats, or does Tom keep 31 hats?
I don't know. I've asked Stephen about this before. I think sometimes the house keeps a lot of them. Sometimes he'll keep some of them. Often,
PRs,
they'll go to PRs for a long time for samples and.
Great if you saw someone walking around New York with that.
Yeah, I'm sure Key Press will be kind of. So these are some of the girls that were kind of stood around. So you can see it's like Bill and Ben, the girls with the really long legs on them,
hats.
Which is really, really amazing.
So we had stationary models off the catwalk, so models walking up and down, but also
girls just stood around.
That's a huge collection then, isn't it?
He's done that before, hasn't he, where he uses static models as a kind of backdrop to what's happening with the show.
Making them all lie down on coffins. What are those?
They're just kind of, they're lying around, so it's like a crazy garden.
A crazy graveyard.
Yeah.
Weird.
I mean, he does put a lot on childhood, and we said about the menswear, a lot of it's just sort of, school uniform.
Yeah.
And there's childish elements within this, how you're approaching it, the simplicity of the colours and the sort of just stick on flowers. And so it's sort of interesting that he's going back to childhood. I wonder what that sort of says really about his own life.
It goes back to what you were saying though, I think, when you talk about how you discovered your style when you were a teenager, I think there's something quite childish about fashion. It is based on kind of like, there's an immediacy to it. It's quite primal. You like it or you don't. There's quite a childish element to it. You want it, want that, want this, and I think there's something quite childish about. When you're a kid, and you're like, I like that. I don't know.
But I wonder if it represents a sort of part of freedom in our lives, that we go back to a point where we thought we were free to express ourselves. So actually, because you see that in a lot of designs. It reminded me when I first off with the guy walking down with the lawnmower, that John Galliano collection made all out of cardboard. Which we've been looking at recently. Which is he got children to design these dresses out and make them out of cardboard. So there's very much that. But I just wonder if there's an interesting sort of point there that people feel to be creative, they have to go back to childhood.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Most designers, if you do talk to them, they talk about their teenage years or they talk about their childhood, don't they? I
think childhood's just irresistible to everyone, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know, I don't often find myself pulling on my childhood. I mean, yes.
Not your own necessarily, but childhood in general. If you see a really sweet child and it says something funny, if I said that, it wouldn't be funny, but if a 4-year-old said it, everyone sort of...
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. But I think you go back to your childhood in your work, things you're interested in. Maybe not aesthetically, but definitely things you're interested in.
Well, give me an example so I can...
Deep.
Sorry, no, we don't. Well, why not?
No, but like you talk a lot about your dad and his work and even
Yes.
just like him collecting antiques, and I think there's an element of kind of that analysis that cause your dad was he was a psychologist.
Yeah, my father was a psychologist, yeah.
Yeah, a psychologist. And I think that kind of idea, you're quite interested in emotions, I think, and looking at...
Yeah, I think probably we all are.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I don't know, I was wondering whether in everybody the idea of freedom is represented by childhood. Because the idea of freedom is not represented by... Actually, we are more free now, because I'm now 55. I have enough money to do roughly what I want. So I can stop SHOWstudio, I can go off and sail around the world, or I could, whatever it is, or go and... So I'm free in that way. Whereas in childhood, of course, you're not free. You can't, you have to ask your parents' permission to do anything, or your nanny's permission, or whatever it is.
Maybe more emotionally free when you're a child.
Yeah, I think that's
So
the
that's
thing,
why I'm wondering whether it is that, whether actually we are physically free now, or socially free.
Depends what your situation's like, isn't it?
Yeah.
As an
Yeah.
adult.
Yeah. You're certainly free of sort of responsibilities, aren't you?
I think that's
at
the
that
thing.
younger age, and perhaps that's why.
I imagine that's the appeal for a designer, because if you speak to any designer, they talk constantly about feeling like there's not enough time and there's too much stuff that they have to get done and they've got to answer too many people, produce too many collections. And I imagine there's if you speak to any British designer, they talk about why they love being at St Martin's, and it's precisely that reason. It's like the last time I could actually do what I wanted and it was really free.
Was
and
it
you could
college?
Yeah, exactly. So I think it is that element of, maybe it's not so much to do with happiness or aesthetics or anything, it's just this kind of idea of freedom. I think if you're a designer,
And space to be able to do that.
Exactly,
Yeah.
space and time, I think is probably the big thing. It's that notion of endless time that you have when you're a kid, like days are endless. I think when you're producing like 20 collections a year, some
Probably doesn't quite feel like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. We should ask him. We should interview all the designers about their childhood.
Well, I wonder if because for a lot of designers they come from quite difficult childhoods, where either they were gay and they were suppressed for being gay, or their father wasn't pleased with them and they were associated more with their mother. Or they come from often quite difficult situations. But that's true of a lot of artists. They come from difficult situations, and I wonder if there's something in that actually, because they couldn't express themselves as a child, or because they felt it's sort of Michael Jackson syndrome. He was so sort of not allowed to be a child that he stayed a child for the rest of his life, because that's what he wanted back. And I wonder, and this is just I'm just wondering, I have no idea whether it's true or not. Well, with Thom, it's a similar thing, because this is so childish, it's so sort of, he talks about, he gives a childlike vision of a man. I wonder if he had some childhood which felt he couldn't do that.
Or it's his version of what he wanted. Sort of childhood, or his kind of adolescence to look like.
But Lee's collections were never that childlike.
No.
Complete opposite.
But do you think he was a repressed child?
No.
No, but that's my
I think
point.
he really wanted to be an adult.
Yeah.
But I think they drew on the things that he was interested with as a child, even the birds. He talked about sitting on his roof and looking at birds.
Yes, that's true, but I think that's a lifelong thing.
Yeah, I think he
interest in
came
nature.
into that a bit later though, didn't he, with walking.
But I don't feel from knowing a little bit about Lee's childhood that he had a sort of difficult childhood. In that way, I don't think he had any money, but I don't feel that he was repressed by either parent or.
No.
I just wonder if I guess Lee disproves the case. Do you create a great artist by giving them a really horrible childhood?
Yeah. But there's that thing that everyone always says, that everyone in fashion was like bullied as a child. Yeah, everyone in fashion was a loser at school, and that's why they want to fit in so much. Which I always think is ridiculous.
Yeah,
but I think a lot of people say that. Isn't it? Makes you want to be creative. But I think for Thom also, there's maybe a sense where he's given quotes before where he's talked about loving things that are provocative and light and funny without being too intellectual. And I think some designers do really want the space to do things that are pointed and funny and enjoyable, and they're not over intellectual. I remember when I interviewed Sibling, they want their works to be seen as intellectual, but they talked a lot about they really take pride in being able to do something that is light but that is no less deep or well realised than something that's about the suicide of nuns, as they put it. And I think there's an interesting thing I really admire that in design. I think it's really interesting. It's very easy to do something very dark and very sinister and that to be seen as good and intellectual. It's much harder to do something light and for that to be seen on the same level of depth and consideration. I think that's really interesting to see in people's work. It's very hard to do something fun, I think, in fashion.
Make people smile.
I think the childlikeness is quite sinister.
Yeah,
it's not a particularly sort of happy vision of child in a way. It's also taking place in a cemetery.
With really nice hedges.
Yes.
Do we like it though? Do we like what he's proposing for a woman?
Yes.
Why do you?
Not
why
all
do
the
you think?
shapes. I mean, some of them I just don't think are very nice, but I think the colour, the overall look, the feel of the whole thing is brilliant. And the prints are really good.
Yeah, they are, aren't they?
Yeah. And the patterns and whatnot. I don't like the suit trousers though. I think you could have done them a bit better even. You know, when they have a really long bit here and it's just not very flattering.
It's not very flattering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just me. But otherwise I think they're beautiful.
Beautiful. And you guys like it as well?
I do, and in terms of a whole collection and the way it's been presented, yeah, it's quite. I mean, it would have been really enjoyable to see a film of it.
Yeah, yeah.
But even the stills.
Why don't they do that? Why don't they show a
so
film?
expensive, probably in New York.
I don't know if it is. To stream
if you're going to go to the expense of putting on a show that looks visually as amazing as this does, there should be a film.
What music was it? So I know, like Benny Hill or something.
But I guess it's interesting what you say, Tom, because I guess in your field as well, in your line of work, that must be just the most refreshing thing when you get people that actually have some vision. Because I think that's what's most impressive about him. You know, like you can say what he's about very easily. I think that's much harder to do with lots of designers today.
Yeah, that goes back to what Nick was saying earlier about, you know, someone that has a very clear intent, very clear vision.
Yeah. And
it's really nice to see him taking that into womenswear. You know.
And you like it, Nick?
I just think how to answer your question. You look. I guess from my point of view, I look at it in two different ways. One, whether I would be happy to photograph it and whether it would be inspiring to photograph, which is yes. There's lots of stuff in there which would be great, make photographs easily. This because they're a very extreme vision. So for me, that's great. A lot of what you're looking for when you get sort of beige trouser suit standing in front of you. It's like, okay, I can do this. But you've got something with a skeleton of a handbag on the head and all those colours and all of that. Yeah. The story's just coming out of there so easily. So so I believe that all clothes have narrative, and you just have to kind of allow it to come out. And so there's lots of narrative in there, lots of it coming out. So from a photographer or a filmmaker or an image maker's point of view, that's great. So I love it for that. And actually, do I like the clothes? Yes, I do. I like what he's proposing. I kind of feel it might be Tom's moment, because he's been slightly sort of on the outskirts of it a little bit. So I was trying to find out how long he'd been designing women's wear.
Well, I think he had that real moment, like, was it a year or so ago, when like Michelle Obama wore her stuff and everyone was like, oh, Tom, it's so exciting. And then I feel like, not that it went a bit quiet, but I feel like you're right, it's now kind of, I think if you just look at the way that people are dressing, as we were saying, loads of girls are wearing suits, like really nice tailoring. It looks really cool, I think. So it feels like a real moment for him. And I think there was that moment when boys just became obsessed with it. Every woman had Thom Browne, those trousers and the brogue with the little tag. And I don't think that many. I don't know a lot of girls that wear Thom Browne, which surprises me actually.
Where can you get it in England?
Yeah, it's really hard to get.
It's quite hard to get, isn't it?
Yeah, really hard to get.
It might be his moment. Maybe this is Tom's season.
Yeah.
Because I mean, things come in and out of fashion, don't they?
Yeah.
Some days everybody wants skirt lengths shorter, and some days they want longer. And maybe that's it's come to the things have all come together. All the sort of the global sort of mind consciousness come together, and everybody wants that, because partly of what you did in your ugly project. Yeah. Because it's a slightly sort of
plugging SHOWstudio's content, weren't you?
Well, I can't do it without really. But it is what we've talked about on SHOWstudio, and you did in the ugly project very well. It's about this slight difficultness in dress, and there's a bit of that in here. Yeah. It's a little bit clunky, a little bit difficult.
I just don't think women want to look like easy anymore. I don't mean that in like a sexually easy way. I don't think they want to look like this is like. I think they want something difficult with them. I think they want to wear something that people don't quite get or that they love and no one else. I don't think they want to look like they've kind of been a cookie cutter and put and it's easy to understand. Which I think for a long time designers used to try and dress women like that.
But he got famous because Michelle Obama wore his dress.
But then so do so many designers. Like look at the number of designers. I think that's just a case of like reach, isn't it? Which is always a bit depressing.
Good to see her in one of these.
I love her style. I think she's fabulous. I will not hear a bad word against her.
Nobody was offering one.
No, she would look great though. I think she'd look fabulous. So we're happy. We like this. Is it a nice thing to talk about in New York?
It's interesting. It's made us talk, and it's been a spectacle. Obviously, it's a little sort of surrealistic, and it's proposing things. So I like it. I mean, physically, I like it. I mean, physically, I think people would look great in it. Yeah. I saw somebody wearing that. I think that'd be, you'd want to know a bit more about that person. Yeah. And I think it is what you were saying about the feminine subtext to being able to dress as a woman for a woman, not as a woman for what one might,
or even for yourself.
What a man would want. For yourself, I guess, is the thing.
Yeah.
So in that way, I like it.
But I think women's dress, you're right, it went through those 3 stages. It was like you dress for a man and then you dress for other women. And I think we're now just getting to that point where you just, designers get that women, like, just they have their styles, like we were talking about. And they don't, you know, for ages it was like about looking hot, and then it was about like looking like you had the best clothes and like other women were jealous of you. And now it's kind of like you have your uniform and you just kind of do that. And I think that's what's quite interesting with this, is it's like...
Interesting to judge where how we see it as a success or not. Is it a success because it sells loads? Or is it a success because everybody writes about it? Or is it a success because it makes other designers do things similar? It's interesting to judge. I mean, personally, I don't know how Thom sells and how much he sells. I guess he's not a big player. Does he have
he sells a lot.
Does he have shops in sort of Bond Street and...
No, not so much. It's quite... lots of kind of concession stuff in department stores. It's relatively hard to get over here, which is annoying.
So stores like Bergdorf and Goodman.
Yeah, Bergdorf, exactly.
Yeah.
And the shirts and trousers sell like crazy well, and especially to guys.
But it's interesting to see how much of his women's wear sells and how much... I mean, I'm interested, in a way not interested, because actually I'm not interested whether he sells 1 million of those skirts or 1. And I'm interested in the clothes and how they look.
But how you measure this?
But how you measure one, because our role sitting here is a bit sort of, thumbs up, thumbs down, was it a success? It's a bit hard to know where to judge
I think
that
it was,
success.
because it went against the grain and it's got people talking about
and it's
it.
really memorable.
I think that's, but it depends on what his backers say.
And he's definitely influencing other people, and I think that's the biggest thing for success with a designer, isn't it? Because even if there are sometimes designers that no one writes about, but they influence people so much. The designers. And I think with Thom, that grey suit, whether you find it weird or not, it's had a massive influence on men's and women's. Like that's hugely successful. That's so influential.
So we think it's a success.
Yeah.
And all our different ways of judging success. We think Thom Show was a success. Well done, Thom.
Should we give him a round of applause to wrap things up?
Yeah.